My invitation to anyone who's considering this conversation, really look at the core of this. If you're going to practice for another decade, if you're young, you're going to practice for 20, 25 years, why not shift your thinking from one of, my God, I'm a brilliant lawyer, everybody should know that, to one of, how can I create a brilliant experience where my clients are the hero of their journey? And how can I create a way of thinking and a process inside my firm that is habitually driven, system driven, and culturally driven that will be transformative for these people, which ultimately will transform your life and transform that of your team.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hi, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Today's topic is about how you and your team can work on building a very powerful client-centric firm. What does that look like? How does it feel? And today I brought my good friend, one of our top practice advisors, Daniel Struna, back onto the podcast to have this particular conversation. Daniel, welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Steve. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me back. I think this is number 4 for me, so kind of becoming a thing, and so I appreciate the invitation.
Well, it's a great strategy by you because you bring up topics that I find interesting. And I'm like, that's a really great topic. Let's put that on the podcast. So you've done a really great job, which is a great lesson for everybody else, which is, hey, I want to talk about this with you and let's do it on the podcast. So you're asking, which I really, really appreciate and like. So it's great to have you here. But I also want to give you, a huge compliment and a particular shout out to one of your clients. He's a fantastic attorney, Kent Burke in Arizona. Kent was just on one of our last episodes of Grow Your Practice with AI, with artificial intelligence. And I know you're coaching Kent. He's a estate and trust litigator in Arizona, one of the top ones in the state, if not the top one.
Yep.
He did a presentation of how he's using AI in his practice, which was fantastic. So he was one of 2 presenters, and I just want to give you a compliment because he gave you a particular shout out on what a great job you're doing. And I just amazed if any of our members are not taking advantage of the Grow with AI course. It's been fantastic. And Kent was just incredible. He just did an incredible presentation. We're getting him back on again just because there's so much to learn from that big brain of his. He just did a great job, really great job.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Kent is fantastic. He's doing some phenomenal things that are just like kind of miles ahead of where some other, what other firms are even thinking at this point. And he's doing it in a space that I just find fascinating that helps. And I think all, Atticus clients in particular and law firms in general, it's a particular area that he's working in specifically with AI that any firm can take and, magnify or amplify the effects of AI in that particular area, which is really systematizing the processes and really upping the game on how you're training and coaching and mentoring your team, which I just think is phenomenal.
Which really is a perfect segue for this conversation, which is understanding and talking about a client-centric culture. So when you say client-centric culture, what's that mean to you?
Yeah, so that's part of what I hope we explore today. And so the topics that I bring to you, Steve, and say, hey, can we do this on the podcast? I bring those topics because they're the type of things that my coaching clients are interested in taking a deeper dive in, learning more about, and really just improving, enhancing where they want to be. Wherever they are today, they want to make improvements and get better and better in different areas. And one of the areas that I perceive this as basically a conversation on marketing, really. Even though the topic is called, we're talking about a client-centric culture and really create, like, how do you go about creating this kind of culture within the firm of being really hyper focused on the client. To me, at the end of the day, it's a marketing, kind of discussion, because everything that you're doing around focusing on the client, the better you can do that, right? The easier it becomes to retain that client, those clients, and the easier it becomes to attract them in the first place. So for me, what does a client centric culture mean? It's a great question. I think it means that one of the core values of the organization is really just hyper focused on the client, seeing from the client's perspective, kind of putting themselves in the client's shoes and really focusing not just on the end kind of legal result that you're trying to accomplish for somebody or that somebody needs you to accomplish for them, but the experience that they have from beginning to end, along kind of that journey that they have with your firm. So for me, it's everything from the initial referral that they might get to your firm or see some sort of marketing and social media or wherever they hear about you initially, all the way to achieving whatever it is that they were trying to achieve by approaching the firm in the first place. So everything that goes within that experience, to me, falls under the definition of get as an opportunity to create a client focused and a client oriented sort of approach and culture.
I like it. I like it. It's interesting as you say that. I heard it as a process conversation. So when you talk about it from a marketing, and I guess marketing is really the promise of the firm, for me, the process is the delivery of that promise. What's the process you do to deliver the promise?
Right.
And when I think of a great client experience, how do you make it a client-centric firm? I always try and look at it from the perspective of how does a process make the client journey easier, quicker, faster, cheaper, better in some way, shape, or form. So you could look at it, I guess, from both viewpoints, from a marketing perspective, and how do you come at it from a customer service, client service perspective to make it quicker, faster, easier, and cheaper on delivering your promise to the client. So the first thing, let's create a definition. Let's work with the definition. So for me, a client-centric firm first begins with the lawyer's mindset. The lawyer has to get their brain wrapped around who the hero of the story is. The hero of the story in most firms is the lawyer. And sometimes they'll include their team, hand out some capes, they look like the Avengers. But at the core of it, that's more about them. To be a client-centric firm, you have to pivot your thinking, your mindset has to shift to how do I make it easier on my prospects? How do I help my clients go through their heroic journey through my firm? And I think that's probably the first pivot that people really have to look at and ask, who is the hero here, me or the client as they go through the firm? Because if that's the case, then the emotional focus has to move off of you from a vanity perspective. I'm so important, I'm so incredible, my team's so important, I'm so incredible, they're so incredible, to how do we make life easier on our client as they go through whatever process inside the firm. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's totally, you're spot on. And I do agree with you, Steve, that creating a client centric culture is a process conversation. The building blocks of how you create the client centric culture to begin with is all built on process and how you interact with the client. When I said that for me, it's also a marketing conversation, I think what I meant by that is that the client experience that you create is a marketing tool, right? As well, it acts as a form of marketing in the sense that the better I've heard you say this before, clients or prospects really can't judge us heavily or really, accurately on our legal, acumen, skill, expertise. They can judge us on the result that we produce, but they can't do that until we produce it, right? So what they really can judge us on is the experience of working with our firm. And so for me, that is a competitive advantage in the marketplace when you can when you have that mindset like you're talking about, and that shift to where you're putting the it's almost more than just putting the client first. It's like you said, it's putting the client and positioning them really as the hero of the story, and then changing how we think about what it, in all the different kind of cascading effects that that'll have on how we operate our law firm and the processes of how we do that.
That's great. So let's talk about a few examples if that works for you. I'll come up with one, and then I'm going to ask you to come up with one.
Sure.
So for me, examples of client-centric practices. This will sound very silly, very simple, but how is your phone answered? This is one of the funniest things that I've dealt with law firms in my entire career. I think most of the lawyers, as they're listening to this episode, can relate to this. Sometimes when you call a law firm, you either get voicemail, a voicemail phone tree, a virtual receptionist, or the classic law office answer. None of those, I think, are a competitive advantage. I think most of those are kind of like sandpaper to a prospect, sandpaper to a certain extent to the client. I understand the efficiency and effectiveness. I understand all that. I totally get it. But if you're trying to stand out, probably the first easiest thing to do is think about how is your phone answered? How is your email responded to? What's your customer service experience like for prospects? So when you're looking at your firm, you're looking at your intake process, my first place to look at is looking at how are your intakes handled via phone, via email. Is that a good, warm, fuzzy experience? Or is it kind of sandpapery? The easiest thing to think about is your own life whenever you're dealing with customer service, whether it's an airline, a restaurant, anything, Amazon, anything. Think about great customer service experiences and bad customer service experience. So I think the second practice is really developing a habit and practice and mindset of the entire firm looking for great ways of creating great customer service, great client experiences, and look for ways that you're creating negative ones and consciously say, well, let's work on simply eliminating some of the negative ones and focus on creating more positive ones. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think kind of what I'm hearing is if you can if a firm as a whole and all the members of the team, right, not just the owner, however small the firm is or ever big, can focus on being, let's just say, being hospitable, being treating people in a way that, the golden rule, right? Treat others in the way that you want to be treated. And basically just laying out the red carpet, so to speak, and making sure that every interaction that, our prospect or our client has with our firm is memorable or not memorable in the sense that it was a negative, right? So that everything, even if it's not some wow factor taking place, at a very minimum standard, it's not leaving them with a negative like a negative impression of the firm or the process. And I think anytime, whether you're calling a law firm or a doctor's office or whoever you're trying to get a hold of for a service or a product or whatever it is, and you get nobody, I mean, first of all, that's incredibly frustrating. Or you get a machine, that's frustrating. You get put on hold for 20 minutes, that's frustrating. So we've all been there. We've all experienced these things. There's certain industries that are kind of famous for, being really great at this or being really terrible. And I think the idea here is as a firm, let's make sure that we're kind of putting ourselves in the category that gets really great at this thing. And the interesting thing is it's not incredibly difficult, right? It takes a little bit of focus and intentionality and making sure that we have the right people in the right place, so that we don't have somebody answering the phone, hello, law firm, but we have, somebody answering with a pleasant voice and a pleasant, kind of way of approaching people, and warm and empathetic and friendly. So yeah, I think it's spot on. I think for me, it just comes back to creating a warm environment that's inviting to people and makes them feel, at the very, bare minimum kind of floor level, that they don't feel like they had a negative interaction.
I think it's great. I think hospitable may be too high of a benchmark for a lot of law firms. I think maybe at least polite. We could work
There you
with
go.
polite.
Polite. Yeah, that's good.
Polite than hospitable. Then we're happy that you called might be the ultimate level. Like we're so happy you called. We're happy, and you answer the phone with a smile on your voice, like you're happy to help this person, which is a whole other level. The
Yeah, I like
reason,
that.
yeah, I think the reason it's so important is a lot of lawyers are focused on their next level of certification, the next playing for kind of what we would call an academic mindset. How do I prove I'm smarter? This is probably the biggest decision point for most clients. They look at a law firm's bio, they probably don't know what your certifications mean. They don't know, what judge you clerk for. They don't know, half the things on your bio. They do know how the phone's answered. Do know how your team treats them. They do know how the customer service experience works. This is one of the reasons in the programs we have, we have this tool we have called the Client Service Expander. But I don't go too deep there. But the whole intention behind that is creating a culture that's client-centric, customer service-centric. So there's a couple of basic practices. So they're just a couple of basic practices. From your perspective, if you did, and just so we're clear, Daniel, if you're listening to this, you're not an Atticus member, you're part of the audience, you're just kind of checking out Atticus. If you start the path to a client centric firm, don't expect it to be resolved in 30 days. It's kind of like getting a black belt in martial arts. You're going to work your way over time to a high level of mastery. But each time that you improve, each time that you get better, it distances you that much more than your competitor. So you do a little bit of work every quarter, a little bit of work every year, and you continually improve the culture towards a more client-centric culture, client-centric practices, client-centric attitudes. Over 1 to 2 to 3 years, you're going to totally transform your practice. My experience is when I was practicing, I didn't have to be 100% better. I just had to be about 20% better than my competitors. And that 20% better was always on the business side, customer service, response time, communication. Those were the things that really made a difference, at least in my practice. So if you're thinking about this, like, how do I do this? Pick one thing, work on it for a quarter, pick another thing, work on it for a quarter. If you're in a program, or if you're working with somebody like Daniel, one of the practice advisors, talk to them about how do I, what are some of the practices? What are some of the ways that we can make a better client-centric firm? But don't think of it that, okay, check the box, we're now doing that. Think of it more like a practice, a mindset, a way of thinking for the rest of your practice. Thoughts on that, Daniel?
I think you nailed it because it is if it's a cultural kind of shift and it becomes like a real value of how the firm is, kind of led and managed. It's not, there's no end game, right? You're always looking for, you have to start somewhere wherever you're at today, but there's not like some place that you're trying to get to. Oh, okay, we're done improving our client experience process. So that's not the goal. The goal is just to, from my perspective, like you said, just to create like this. I think it's about creating a culture where not just you as the owner, most of the audience here are law firm owners, but not just the owner looking for, areas and parts of the firm and parts of the process that they could improve the client experience, but for the whole team, to the extent that you have a team, is also looking for those areas, right? So they may see a lot more than you actually, especially depending on where you're at and your kind of journey of removing yourself as the hero from the firm. Because at some point, some of our, clients that have done a really great job of over time removing themselves extensively from the day-to-day kind of, management of the firm, let alone the legal technical, providing of the legal services. They may not be in the best position to know how they can improve the client experience. So you're going to have to some extent, rely on your team for that, kind of feedback, as well as the clients themselves, obviously.
My rule of thumb is somewhere between 3 to 4, you start becoming more and more removed. So 3 to 4 employees, you start becoming more and more removed from how your client service, your customer services are actually impacting your prospects and clients. So just think about that if you're considering taking this on as Daniel and I talk about it. Daniel, what are some of the benefits from your perspective? What are the benefits? Why is it worth the investment from your perspective to do this?
Well, like I said, I think one of the things that is over time, a tangible benefit is I do think that this does give any organization, especially law firm, a competitive advantage. Like you just said, if you could do something 20% better than your competitors are doing it, you've, put yourself in a position to be at an advantage over them when it comes to marketing. Um, so anything that you can do to improve the client experience and the way that the client interacts with your firm, it is going to create. You may not see a tangible, uptick in revenue the month after you implement, a particular strategy or way of improving your client experience. But I would be surprised if somebody that was focused and very intentional on continuously making improvements to the client experience in their firm did not see over time in a higher level of clients being attracted to their firm, and a higher level of conversion and retaining those clients. And I think the reason would be because you know, oftentimes your best source and your best marketing tool is your clients, right? Your clients and your past clients. So the more that you're improving the client experience, the more you're basically improving the people that are best positioned to continually, provide you with referrals down the road. So I think, you know, dollars for dollars, that's probably one of the biggest benefits that is going to, provide. Steve, what about for you, from your perspective, what is one or two of the biggest benefits of focusing on, client-centric culture?
I'm going to do three basic ones. One you nailed, which is referrals. And that's assuming that you're actively cultivating and asking for referrals from good clients. Not all clients, but just your good ones. And that becomes more of a team-wide conversation, because if everyone's aware that we're going to ask our good clients for referrals, and everyone's going to make sure that we're handling those good clients with a high level of attention, some great customer service. Number two, and this is a retention strategy for me. Not everybody wants to work in a law firm because they make good money. A lot of people want to work in law firm because they make a difference. In allowing someone to put their heart into their work inside a law firm, they can feel like they make a difference, like they matter. So contributing to another human being's life is a fantastic way of allowing your team to express who they are and how they feel about being inside your law firm. Do their behaviors align with your mission? The simplest way to do that is to give them freedom and discretion around providing great client service. The simplest way, and this is three for me, here's a simple, practical question. So if you're driving down the road, don't write this down, but if you're somewhere where you can stop, here's the question that I'm going to encourage you to share with your team. What's one small way today that we can improve client service, customer service, or prospect service? So there are three different variations, but what's one small way that we can do this? So if you start asking that question, the question comes from a whole school of management philosophy, lean thinking, lean management. That question is a Kaizen question. How do we make one small improvement? So the question is, how do we make one small improvement to our customer service? So you're not really saying, hey, we're going to add more people, we're going to invest more time in technology, we're going to do this. The question is, what's one small thing we can do today to improve our customer service experience? So I'm just passing that question on for whatever it's worth. Daniel, you may have one that you want to add, but I'd like to talk a little bit with you for about, going a little bit further in building a client-centric culture. Like, if you become aware of it, how do you start to build it more intentionally with beyond some of the practices that we're having? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. I think it would be great if people write that question down and go over it with their team and come up with one, like you said, at least one, actionable item that they could, one thing one area or one thing that they can do that would improve their client, or customer, experience over the next, whatever the time frame is. A lot of Atticus members operate on a 90-day, goal setting plan. So that would make sense for most of our, listeners.
Now, you can also take that question and give it to the client. If
Yeah.
there's one small way that we can improve your experience, what would it be? This question has been in the Atticus evaluation process for the group programs for a decade. And we've gotten a lot of really great feedback from that one question. It's really changed a lot of things, even the scheduling, some of the food that we provide, timing that we provide, some of the things that we do at receptions have come out of that one question where people have given us good feedback. In fact, that could be a great question for us to ask the listeners right now, which is if there's one small way that you think we can improve these episodes, uh, other than replacing me. Actually, I think I'd be open with you replacing me. I think about that, including replacing me. Don't hesitate to pop that to us and email me at Steve, stve.riley, Riley, at atticusadvantage.com, and let me know your thoughts. We're always open to suggestions on improving this. And I imagine a lot of them say keep Daniel on the podcast on a regular basis. So I'm anticipating that.
I was gonna say, thanks for putting that out there on an episode that I happen to be on. I appreciate that. That could go one of two ways, so we'll see.
It's always going to go. Look, you get nothing but compliments. I haven't had anyone ever say anything negative about you ever. So nothing
Thanks.
but compliments. So what do you think? Building a client-centric culture, what do you think are the core strategies from your perspective?
Well, real quick, I just wanted to highlight something because you used a great example, which is what one of the things that Atticus does. Atticus is doing something really innovative, I think, over the last couple months, with that is being led by our founder, Mark Powers. Anything you want to say about that, in terms of ways to measure our success and ways to get really solid feedback?
And so this was actually an initiative by our CEO, Valerie Peterson. And Mark is talking to past clients and current clients and really going in depth talking about how to improve their Atticus experience, improvement suggestions, things that they would like us to do. So we're really had a tremendous initiative for the past 6 months where Mark personally, the president and founder, is talking to past clients and existing clients about how to improve their experience in Atticus. So yeah, we're trying to do the best we can to always improve our client experience. So it's a good point, Daniel. Very good point.
Yeah, so it's like I love it because it's a real world example of one way that you can, it's a measuring tool, right? You can use it to the feedback to measure how far you've come and see the improvements that are working, or maybe see the improvements that are, we thought if we did this, the clients would love it, but it turns out we kind of missed the mark and then we can readjust. But we were not going to know we missed the mark unless we're actively seeking, some sort of feedback from our clients. So I think that's fantastic. And then at the same time, the dual benefit, like you mentioned, is you're getting real world live, feedback and for future improvements, which I just think is fantastic. Um, and you mentioned a really great Atticus tool called the Client Service Expander. Did I remember that right? Yeah. So if I'm remembering that tool right, one of the components of it is it's, even the negative feedback can be turned into a learning experience and a way for improvement going forward. So I think, kind of facing reality, right? Where are we missing it so that we cannot miss it in the future?
Yeah, the concept comes from a fantastic book that we encourage our clients to read in the group program, which is called Hug Your Customers. And I'll put a link in the show notes for it. The question that we created, the worksheet that we created, was where can we hug our clients better? And then I added a question which was called, where are we slapping our clients? So I was trying to look at where are we doing a really bad job? Like where are we just kind of blowing it? And then where are we doing a good job? So it creates a lot of conversations internally about, we kind of slapped over here. We didn't mean to, but we slapped. We didn't do a great job. And then over here, we did a good job. So you're constantly creating a conversation of making yourself aware of how to improve always the client experience, and at the same time trying to reinforce where you're doing it. So the question's pretty straightforward. The process is pretty straightforward. So let's talk, if you're okay, let's talk about the 3 C's. You and I have come up with 3 C's for building a client-centric culture. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it.
First one is communication. And I think the clarity around what you're communicating is the core element. So if you have a firm mission statement, if you have firm values, and you're trying to make the client the hero of your firm story, being able to consistently communicate that to your team is part of your job as a leader and part of your job as a manager, as part of the whole firm culture. It's easier said than done, because sometimes as lawyers, we say something once and we think we don't need to say it again. This is probably where it pays the most to over communicate and create a habit of reinforcing this particular type of communication. To a certain extent, it almost becomes a mantra inside of team meetings and team conversations. So the first one for me is communication. How about you?
Yeah, so agreed. And I think the other aspect of communication is the client, obviously, of course, like you said, related to the team and creating the culture in the first place. And um, I think Brene Brown gets credited with saying clear is kind, right? So that kind of being incredibly clear and in the communication of what you're trying to accomplish as a team, right? When it comes to specifically the client experience. And then the other aspect of communication is, of course, how it relates to the clients themselves, right? How are we showing up and communicating with the clients? How are we, listening to them, actively and hearing what they have to say, and not just what we think they're going to say, right? That sort of thing. And then how are we proactively and very, this is probably just proactively communicating with our clients, right, and prospects. And I think communication in that sense is so important because it's, if we look just historically, right, it's the number one bar complaint against attorneys pretty much nationwide, which is lack of communication. And so it's kind of, it's low hanging fruit in a sense because the bar is really low in terms of how other firms are doing this. So any way that we can improve the quality of our communication with our clients, and but also the clarity, right? And then the being proactive, I think, is just a huge one. Reaching out to them even when they might not expect to hear from us, right? Just to give them some sort, even if there's no update to give, just call them and let them know we're thinking about them, and as soon as there's an update, we're going to get back to them. That type of thing.
Well, I think you nailed it. This was a very painful lesson that I learned practicing. I quickly called Mondays plumber Mondays because, whenever there's something that breaks over the weekend, nobody calls the plumber over the weekend because the rates are too high. But Monday morning, the plumbers flooded with all kinds of work. I noticed that when I was litigating, especially, or doing any type of active, court work, Monday was when everybody called with questions about their cases. So I was like, how can we prevent this? Because it was like all Monday we were spending, responding to phone calls and complaints and how come you haven't called me? So we started dividing up and that was a reactive, just like you said, it was a reactive process. So we started dividing up the cases, and then Friday we would organize legal assistants and paralegals. They would organize themselves and proactively call to give updates, even if the update was no update. That made such a huge difference on our Mondays. Now, I personally would call 3 or 4 clients days based on the case and what was going on, just to update them. Made a huge difference. So we started this whole process of reaching out and updating the clients on a consistent, regular basis. In fact, we started scheduling update appointments, which was such a huge difference for us, because then the clients weren't calling anxious and stressed. We said, well, we got an update appointment in, a week. Let's talk then. And it really reduced a lot of interruptions and stress and improved the overall client service. So I think that's a great point. Hey, Steve, I just want to talk to you for a minute about probably my favorite workshop to teach right now. It's called The Path to a Great Practice and a Great Life. So it doesn't matter if you're a member or if you're new to Atticus, this is a perfect place to come and start your journey of what a great practice and a great life looks like to you. There are 4 elements to the workshop. The first is about your income. If you're going to have a great practice and a great life, you're going to need some cash. One of the questions I always get asked is there a shortcut? Is there a quicker and easier way of making more money? There is, but there's a catch to it. In order to make more money, you want to study how other lawyers have increased the income and the growth of their practice. One of the things we've done at Atticus for the past 35 years is study what the top 20% earners, 10% earners, and ultimately, what do the top 1% earners do? One of the things that we do is reveal and look at what are the 4 core strategies of a top 1% attorney and how you can learn from that 1%er in increasing your practice. And that can be your shortcut. To grow your practice faster, you need to have a bold vision for what your life looks like. The wind in your sails for growth is ultimately the vision of what a great life looks like. In my experience, lawyers that have a terrific, powerful vision for a great life will grow a great practice quicker, faster, and more efficiently than those who don't. It's one thing to have a dream. It's another thing to take action and build foundations under that dream. That's the next thing that we'll work on the workshop. What are the steps you're going to take immediately from the workshop to start building on your vision of a great life and great practice? So if you're a fan of the conversation of what a great practice and great life looks like, this is the greatest opportunity for you to take action now and register for the workshop so we can work together on taking your vision of your great practice and great life and making it come to life. A link to register is included in the show notes, as well as a longer video by me explaining each element of the workshop. If you're a member of Atticus, it's included already in your membership. If you're new to Atticus, I'm giving you a promo code that will take $500 off. All you have to do is click the link below and put in podcast 500 and it'll get you the discount. So hit the link, register for the workshop. I look forward to seeing you there. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. So the first C is communication. The second C is
Consistency, right? So, in terms of, what are your thoughts, Steve, in terms of this being, how does consistency in your mind play into building and creating a client experience that's, top notch?
one of the biggest challenges that we have when we run a law firm is that we don't appreciate how our own habits impact how we practice and the habits of our team. So improving systems and processes, either through your case management systems, through a CRM, through whatever way that you can do it, allow you to start to shift a consistent behavior, a consistent action. My experience, this is one of the reasons we teach the habit of building habits in our group programs. This is one of the reasons that we have the habit of building habits inside the My Great Life Planner or Focuser, depending on what you want to call it. Because I think the core of this is you really have to start thinking about how to, as a professional, start to develop a good habit of building habits that produce consistent, successful outcomes in your life and your practice. The second element of this, and it comes from the book, The Power of Habit, is what are called keystone habits. And keystone habits are organizational habits, habits that you built into the organization that are consistent practices like team huddles, case status meetings, cash flow focuser meetings, proactive things that you do as an organization that reinforce the firm's culture. So the simple question that we were playing with earlier, like the Kaizen question. So I think first thing, as the owner and team leader and whatever role you're playing, you have to think about how are your habits reinforcing consistently successful behaviors. Then you look for checklists, systems, and processes, whether they're driven by software, whether driven by any type of reminder process, whatever you want to do, starts to build a consistent behavior. So I think the systems are core. The first thing is a conscious awareness of your habits. A lot of lawyers who bill by the hour do a terrible job of putting their time in their billing, right? They just do a terrible job putting their billing in. I did it when I was practicing just terrible. I was too busy, never had any time. Now, you could give me systems, I had a sophisticated software process for billing. I still didn't do it. It still required my lazy butt to put, sit down from the keyboard. One of the breakthroughs I had was I actually hired someone as an assistant who entered my time for me, which was a revolutionary thing for me. They got nicknamed the time cop. But the whole purpose of yeah, the whole purpose of that was we quickly learned that I wasn't going to do it. So we hired someone that would basically, giving me adult supervision to make sure we capture time. It's amazing how much our realization rates in our customer service and our billing increased by that simple technique. But that's a habit, right? If you think about it, that's a habit. That's a habit. And as the owner, you have to, or the leader, no matter what you are, you have to show habits that are successful. You have to set the tone for consistent behavior, which I think for me leads me to the third C. So, first one's communication, two is consistency. The third one is care, which a lot of lawyers care greatly, but I don't think we practice great empathy. And we don't practice great empathy with our teams. We don't practice great empathy with our clients. I think we lose that empathy. And I think we lose the empathy for three reasons. Number one, we get burned out. Like you just get burned out. You just get burned out of a period of time and you get that big heart of yours gets squeezed. And at some point in time, you just lose touch with why you're doing what you're doing, which goes to the great life, great practice argument, the whole purpose of our show. Why are you doing what you're doing? And if you're getting burned out and you're losing that, you're going to lose empathy. There's no question about that. Number two, for me, is understanding that if you're not a very empathetic person, when you hire team members, you may hire team members based on disc profiles that are going to be client relationship managers, and they may be the empathetic eye and ear and hand that the client needs to hold, whatever type of case they're going through. So you can actually hire for empathetic people, hire an empathetic culture if you're not an empathetic creature. The third thing is creating a culture around this. And this goes to leadership, this goes to management. I've actually worked with law firms, and I think I've talked to you about this before in prior episodes, where I've gone in and the lawyer has brought me in particular, to turn the culture around. And we may have 8 to 10 employees, and I'm listening to what's going on, and I'm listening to the negativity inside the firm and all the complaints. And we try and do a couple of things to turn the firm around, and we can't because the culture's turned negative. Now, what's obvious to me is never obvious to the lawyer because the negativity started with the lawyer. And one of the big, terrible mistakes that I made and I see other lawyers make is they take their complaints about clients backstage and they share complaints about the clients with their team members. Once you do that, you have poisoned the well. You can't fix a poisoned culture. Each of those firms, we started with the worst first, terminated the worst first, brought in somebody new, and insulated them from the negativity as best we could. Then we brought in somebody else. Then we brought in somebody else. We had to work with the owner, change their behaviors. Then we could change the firm culture. But basically, we had to take everybody out back, shoot the entire firm, and replace them to replace the culture and start over with a new culture because the habits, the thinking, the conversations were actually very negative. And it was caused by the lawyer, which is the sad thing. The lawyer may have an empathetic heart, but they may have bad behaviors, negative habits where they go backstage with their team members and complain about their clients. If you got to complain about your client, call your coach, call your colleagues in your group program, call your rope team, uh, write a nasty email. Feel free to send it to me and I'll just read it and then delete it so you at least get it off your chest. But once you teach your team members it's permissible to complain about clients, permissible to complain about referral sources, permissible to complain about each other, you have now thrown up on them and you've caused a negativity virus and it will start to spread and ultimately hurt the growth of your firm. It's a terrible thing. One of the terrible lessons I had to learn. It's one of the terrible lessons I've had to help other lawyers clean up and fix. So the care is important, and care is reflected not only by your behavior, your team's behavior, but also how you treat your clients in front of your team when your clients aren't there. That's a critical lesson, painful lesson I learned. Anything you want to add to that?
Two things. One, just kind of a nugget that you dropped there, which is, for any attorneys listening that are outside of the Atticus community, one of the things that you don't might not have is what Steve mentioned, which is anywhere to take those sort of, those sort of complaints, right? Somebody to kind of have a shoulder to talk to, cry on, or a person to talk to, whether it's a coach or people in your group or one of your rope team members. So I just think you kind of just hit on one of the huge advantages of, coaching, frankly, or having some sort of supportive community that you can be involved in. So I just think that's important to highlight that. The other part I would say is with care. Part of what I'm hearing you say, Steve, is that my mind goes to trust. So you have an attorney that wants to, turn things around and like create this culture, this client-centric culture, and get their team on board. But if there's not a foundation of trust amongst the team members to be able to do that, it's pretty much going to fall flat, right? Because the team is going to know it's not really the real deal, and there's no level. They don't have any. It's hard to be caring and empathetic and supportive when to the clientele when you're not existing in a similar environment, as a culture. So I think that's part of it. And I think that goes back to foundationally a level of trust.
All right, so let me share if I got this straight, because what you said was pretty brilliant. If the lawyer hasn't created a culture of care and empathy inside the firm with their team, and they're not reflecting care and empathy inside the firm, you cannot then expect care and empathy to be expressed to the clients and prospects. Is that your point?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, I think you could try, but it's probably not going to work out very well.
It's not going to work out very well. After a while, the inauthenticity will come back to haunt you. I was at a firm when I was first practicing, and screaming at associates and staff was an acceptable behavior. And I've seen other people. Right now, I'm on a board where one of the board members thinks the best way of giving direct feedback is by writing a scathing, flaming, derogatory, negative, and somewhat humiliating email to people that the board is interacting with and managing. It's fascinating to watch, because it is the core of disempowering someone that you're collaborating with to make a great experience for the clients. So I think you nailed it. If you're not empathetic towards your team, if you're not creating an empathetic culture, it doesn't mean you can't hold your team members accountable. It doesn't mean that you can't give them directive correction. But if you're not in a position where they know that you're listening and you get what they have to say, the core of a client-centric culture may not take root. I think it's an excellent point, Daniel. Very good point. Very good point. I have one thing I want to talk about real quick that you brought up, if that's okay, and then I want to start to wrap up.
Sure.
One of the greatest challenges to being a solo small firm lawyer, team leader, is it's a lonely, lonely journey. Some of the lawyers make the mistake of trying to use a friendship template or a family template with their team members, and think that if I create a social contract and a social connection with my team members, and I can share with them the personal stuff that's going on in my life and the personal frustrations I have, and I ask them to hold me accountable, and I ask them to do this, then you start to undermine the management and leadership structure of your organization. One of the core elements of growing yourself and growing your firm is to be in relationships in a community with like-minded thinkers, like-minded players, which is one of the reasons the Atticus community is so valuable, why so many members love our community. I think that a lot of lawyers try and satisfy the anxiety, and they satisfy the loneliness by engaging in a relationship strategy with their team members, where it becomes a social relationship. They try to make it like a family relationship, like a sibling relationship, and it ultimately erodes the trust, because while it may work maybe 1 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, I don't think it works. And I've seen this happen over and over. So I'm going to put an invite here, Daniel. I'm going to put an invite in here. If you're a member of our audience and you're feeling lonely, you're not feeling great about how you're growing your practice, or if you're a member of our community and you think there's a lawyer, someone that you think should join our community, I'm going to put in the show notes a link to the Path to a Great Practice and Great Life workshop. It's probably the most powerful introductory conversation we're currently having right now with members. And I believe I'll put in the link. I think it's podcast 500, which will take $500 off the price of it. But the question really of growth begins first with you as the owner, as the attorney, and looking at you, how you're going to shift your thinking, shift your beliefs, shift your mindset, and where do you go to get that support so you're not feeling lonely, you're not feeling scared, you're not feeling anxious, you're not feeling confused. And most lawyers are incredibly bright. Their team members are incredibly bright intellectually, upper 2% of the population, not financially, but intellectually. The experience I've had is that the lawyers suffer enough. They have to go through enough pain before they go, raw intellect alone is not going to figure this out. Raw intellect alone is not going to give me what I need to do. Raw brain power won't get me to the next level, which makes sense because the raw brain power has only gotten you so far. This is where they get stuck.
Or
You know what?
willpower. I would
You know
add
what? You
willpower
know
to
what?
that too.
You know
That
what?
only gets you
You know
so
what?
far for
You know
so
what?
long,
You know
right?
what? You know what? Yeah, pain tolerance, willpower, pain tolerance will only get you so far so long. So, Daniel, if you're okay, let's start to wrap up today. Let's start to call it a close. What are final thoughts that you have on building a client-centric firm or community, I guess? What are your final thoughts?
So is it fair if I, or this would be totally unfair if I throw you a final kind of question? It probably really could be the content of a whole other conversation. And maybe in 60 seconds, you could just say something about how the client experience intersects with pricing.
Yeah, that's totally unfair and the core of a whole other episode, but I'll give you a shot.
Okay.
At one point in my practice, in a particular element, I was charging 3 times what one of my competitors was charging. And he was a good friend of mine, a friend at least. And he called me and said, "Hey, look, I'm double board certified. I'm a really smart guy. You can't charge that." And I said, "Well, you're twice as smart as I am, clearly. What you should do is just raise your prices to my level," which he did, and promptly crushed his firm, crashed it, had cash flow issues, couldn't compete at that price point. What he was missing was he was coming in from the perspective that I am a double board certified lawyer and I'm wicked smart. What he was missing was I built an incredible client service experience around a particular type of customer where price was not the issue. What was the issue was time and customer service. What they wanted was their problem solved with a high level of expediency. They wanted to delegate the bulk of the problem to our firm, and they didn't want to have this problem keeping them awake at night. Now, this is a premium A++ client. These were typically lawyers, CEOs, physicians. One of them was the head of a major hospital chain. One of them was a department leader in NASA. Uh, so they were all very, very high level, highly compensated professionals that didn't have a lot of time, didn't have a lot of patience, and were willing to pay to fast track and get problems solved. And they're willing to pay at a high premium. The problem that my friend had was he was used to selling Chevys, and he thought if he raised his price to Rolls-Royce and Mercedes without building a Rolls-Royce or Mercedes, then he could then triple his price, which was not what I'd done. I had built a whole customer service process around this particular niche, this particular client, this particular prospect, and they were referring each other in. I wasn't really marketing hardcore for them, but I was asking for these types of referrals. I was asking for this type of prospect, and they were referring each other in. And they usually said the same thing. They all said the same thing. This firm is without hesitation the most expensive, but they're the best at solving this problem. And they'll get it done quickly, without a lot of pain, without a lot of drama, and they will get this taken care of for you. It was a completely different experience, right? So when you're thinking about it and you're looking at it, it's a completely different experience. My friend raised his price to that of a Mercedes or Rolls Royce, and still was selling a Chevy, and people could tell the difference. They were like, no, this is still a Chevy. And doesn't mean he wasn't a brilliant lawyer. He was a very good lawyer. The experience that he created was a Chevy experience. I was over here working at how to create a Rolls Royce and Mercedes experience. How do I really create this for this premium client? So it's a good question. I don't know if that story answers it well.
I think so.
And it wasn't done overnight. Like that was 1 to 2 to 3 years of worth of work of paying very, very close attention to this particular type of client, our prospect that would write this premium check. And for me, I would rather have one person paying 3 times for this particular service because I could pay really, really close attention. My team could pay really, really close attention. So when you look at your client service experience, you have to think at the core of it, what's your practice model, who you're trying to work for, how you're trying to take care of this person, what's the experience you're trying to create. The core of this begins with your shifting your thinking around, am I up for building a firm that's completely unique, completely different than my competitors? And to do that, you have to start first with how you think. What is your mindset around this conversation? So you did a great job of jujitsuing that one right back to me when I asked you what your final thought was. So what's your final thought?
So now, so and it was a totally unfair question. So yeah, sorry about that.
I'm not bringing you back on here anymore. Go ahead. Your turn.
So my 2 takeaways, partly based on what you just said. One is I wanted people to hear that there is a correlation between the experience that you provide to your clients and your ability to make more money, right, at the end of the day. So there is a correlation there. It may not be the why behind why you do it, but there is a corollary. And then second is something that you just said, we talked about earlier, is it doesn't happen overnight. So my real hope, and I think yours too, is that people will come away from this conversation with 1, 2, or 3 things that they can do in the short term, and just look at this in that kind of spirit of Kaizen and continually looking for areas to make improvements. And maybe starting with one of the C's, right? The communication, the consistency, or the care. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you, Daniel. I think there's 2 levels on this one for me. We try to put in a lot of practical tips, practical things that you can do immediately in your practice. The second level is much more, for me, a much more spiritual, a much more intense conversation of, if you're going to practice as a team lead, associate attorney who owns a firm, partner, and you're going to practice and you really in your heart want to make a difference and you commit to creating a client-centric firm, that requires a whole level of emotional and intellectual commitment at a different level. That really, for me, is the core of great practice and ultimately great life. When I was getting those clients at 3 times my friend's rate, I was having a great time. And I was making a lot of money, but I felt like for these particular types of clients, I really mattered. And I did. I mattered to them, I mattered to their family, and they told me, without hesitation, they told me, thank you, you made a difference. So my invitation to anyone who's considering this conversation, really look at the core of this. If you're going to practice for another decade, if you're young, you're going to practice for 20, 25 years, why not shift your thinking from one of, my God, I'm a brilliant lawyer, everybody should know that, to one of, how can I create a brilliant experience where my clients are the hero of their journey, and how can I create a way of thinking and a process inside my firm that is habitually driven, system driven, and culturally driven, that will be transformative for these people, which ultimately will transform your life and transform that of your team. That's more of an invitation than anything else. That's not a practical tip. That's just an invitation from you and me to somebody who's listening to this going, if I'm going to be doing this for another decade or 20 years or 30 years, that sounds like a lot more fun, a lot more meaningful, a lot more impactful than just cranking out work for the next X many years. So that's the second level for me on that. So does that make sense to you, bud?
Yeah, and I'll just note that if somebody, wants to kind of accept, or that second invitation, then go back to your first invitation as a great starting place, right? Which was to the workshop. So, and I'm sure that'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, it'll be in the show notes. I know we have people listening to this podcast, and they're telling us they're getting a lot out of it. But I want to invite you into a more deep, meaningful opportunity to allow you to really explore what does a great practice and a great life look to you. And the gateway to that is really the Path to Great Practice, Great Life Workshop. So I'm put that in. It may sound kind of salesy or advertising, but I don't know where else to help someone who's part of the audience checking us out. It's all done virtually, so I don't know where to help someone to say, come on in, the water's fine, you'll have a great time, life is good, you'll be very happy if you do it. And with that, Daniel, I just want to say thanks. You keep bringing me interesting topics. You keep coming to these episodes prepared. You keep making a difference in the Atticus community. You're doing just a heck of a job. And I just want to say thanks. Thanks for collaborating with me, and thanks for being part of my great life and great practice.
Thank you, Steve. I always enjoy being here, and I really, truly, thoroughly enjoy these conversations and hope that they're impactful for the people that hear them. I know that it's impactful for me, so thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, bud. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.